You talk quite a lot there about transition coordinators and the intensity, the level of support that you're able to offer to young people to bring them in and to manage them through the process. How do you avoid them becoming overly dependent on that? As it's obviously something that's not going to be able to be there in the long term.
I think a lot of it is about helping young people to develop the skills of independence. And for some people that's about independent living, independent socialising, independent learning. And one of the things that I think we need to do more of actually is to try and influence those that are receiving young people. And so it's not all about the young person having to adapt completely to something, but it's also about the receivers having to adapt and recognise that there are learners or volunteers or employees who have a different set of needs, who are coming from a different part of society sometimes. And so one of the things, for example, as a college that we do, we're looking very carefully at what we are expecting our learners to do and be able to do. And we've developed this notion of studentship and a set of skills and attributes and even beliefs that are about how young people can learn most effectively. And we're starting to look very closely at how we can help them develop that as early on in their learning programme as possible. And I think there's some really important connections there between the things that we've identified as being effective studentship and things that an employer would say they're looking for as an effective employee. But there's an emphasis or an onus on us as an organisation to make sure that we recognise that people are still on that journey. So they don't come to us as perfect learners, ready to achieve their qualification. They come to us as individuals with a whole range of needs. Likewise, as an employer, we've got 1,200 staff. Staff come to us, not the fully formed member of staff for the job role, and we have to help them develop that. So I think there's something about that adaptation as well, and we haven't, to be honest, we haven't really perhaps explored that as much as we might do. But for me, one of the really important things is about helping young people develop those skills themselves. And that's not something that's a quick fix that you can do immediately. But in order to develop those skills, they've got to have those basics and they've got to have that security and that self-confidence, which is where the high-intensity support comes in.
So that expectation that things are going to move on, that level of support won't be available forever, that's something you try and build in from the very beginning.
Yes, yeah, because I think we all know, no one could afford to maintain that level of investment in an individual. And so it's important that we do plan for and expect it to tail off. And for some young people, they won't need the support for a long time. Others may need it for much longer. And again, it's just recognising that and tailoring the provision accordingly. Again, if I have the parallel for when we're receiving learners on our mainstream programmes in college, we tailor the tutorial support, the additional learning support to their needs. Some kind of require this much and some require that much, So it's actually, making sure you've got the sort of diagnosis right and the needs of the individual.
You sometimes hear a critique of programmes like yours that are very much about trying to re-engage young people with learning, that perhaps they're putting too much emphasis on the engagement part, that by being perhaps a bit uncritical of using anything that can possibly be found to try and attract young people in, with very appealing sorts of things, perhaps media-based or whatever, that it's a little bit unrealistic, that you're putting too much emphasis on trying to bring them in the first place, not thinking hard enough about the realism of what's going to happen in the long run and what the labour market's actually looking for. Is that a critique that you recognise, and how do you try and deal with that here?
I do recognise it, but I think also we have to be realistic about how do you engage young people's interest and enthusiasm, because that's the hook that we have to find to get them even talking to us. They're not just going to come over the threshold of an organisation like this or walk into a building somewhere. So we have to really work hard at thinking what's going to attract them and what's going to involve them. So there is an element of the initial lure to get them involved. But I think fairly quickly it's also about explaining and exploring with them what's for their future. Where are they going? What do they want to do? What do they see as their future? And then helping them think about how they're going to get there. And I think it has to be very much a sort of future-focused approach. So it is about aspiration, and it is about, expectations for their futures, and also helping them to see some different models and different ways of getting there as well, because not everybody follows the same route, obviously, to success.
So you very much try and manage expectations.
One of the things that I've heard a lot in talking to employers is they want people who are numerate, literate, IT literate, good timekeepers, good communicators, team players, basically. That's what they want. And in some ways, there is an argument to be had about, does it matter through which route someone acquires that core set of skills? And does it matter if they do it through photography or through hairdressing, or through construction? Because the way in which they learn and the tools they use to learn aren't necessarily going to be the ones that they will then have to use in a job. And what we see is a number of young people who maybe undertake a business course and end up doing something that isn't, if you like, a business-related activity, or our students who do fine art don't end up necessarily painting for a living. So it's actually it's thinking about the medium for learning as being important. However, I do clearly recognise your point about the skills needs of the locality. And one of the things that we do look at really carefully, we work very closely with the Chamber of Commerce, with Job Centre Plus, and we've also set up our own, if you like, shop front in Eastbourne called Eastbourne Works, which is a service purely focused on working with local employers to try and make sure that we're bringing in the right kind of labour force and informing potential learners, potential employees of the opportunities that are available and how they're going to get themselves ready for those roles.
Do you think the education and training sector is working well enough with employers that the two different sides really recognise what each other are looking for? We hear a lot said from employers about young people not coming forward with the right sort of skills and so on. Do you think the two sectors really understand each other's needs well enough?
I think there's some really interesting tensions in this, and one of them is to do with almost with timescales as well. Employers who say they're articulating a skills need is maybe, I need 5 people in 2 weeks' time. Clearly, education doesn't produce 5 people in 2 weeks' time. There's something about the longer term view. And with the sorts of employers that we have locally, there are 90% small businesses in East Sussex. Therefore, their horizons are not a kind of 2-year span of saying, we know we're going to need 100 people in 2 years, and there's a kind of ability to train and develop those skills. So there is, for me, there's something about that difference in time span and expectations. However, I do recognise that employers consistently are saying, we want these core skills that I talked about earlier, the literacy, the numeracy, the IT, etc. And I do think education understands that and has got it, really. And I would say in particular colleges, FE colleges have, because our whole history and heritage is based on working with employers and developing people for the workforce. I know locally employers say to me, oh, well, it's the youngsters coming out of schools who don't have that. Question is, at 16, are they ready for the labour market? And does the national curriculum or the new English baccalaureate, will that really prepare people to be right for the workplace? And to be honest, I'm not sure. I think there is something about that vocational experience and education that is really important to produce more well-rounded people who are ready for employment.
By the time you're working with this cohort of very disengaged young people that you're talking about, we might argue that it's almost too late, that the damage has been done, that you're actually really having to run to catch up. Are there things you'd like to see happening much further back upstream, earlier on in young people's lives, to perhaps reduce the numbers that you're having to deal with in the first place?
I think it's really difficult to say that there is one point or a set of things that need to be done earlier. I think there's always the argument that anyone could say, well, if only in secondary schools they did this, and they will say, if only in primary schools they did this. Primary school colleagues say to me, if only at home they had learned this. And actually, some of the stories they tell me about children who start primary school at the age of 5, who don't know how to hold cutlery, they're maybe not even potty trained. You can actually see that the roots go way back, and they go back right into upbringing, family, community support. And that is something that really does need to be addressed, I think, if we are going to have the more sort of level playing field, I suppose is the way to put it. And that's, we've then got to be realistic and say, well, we can't possibly solve all those problems. And the education system certainly can't solve them on our own. We're a part of that jigsaw, but we are only a part, and I think it's recognising that as well. Having said all of that, I think there are some things that do enable improved progression and motivation. And one of the things that this college did very well was when the increased flexibility project was available for young people aged 14 to 16, where there was additional government funding to enable young people who were not suited to school to do more vocational education with the right kind of support, the right kind of investment. That had a massive impact on engagement, motivation and progression. And the schools reported that even with 1 day a week in a college environment, it transformed some young people's behaviour in school, and it meant they got more out of their other 4 days in the classroom. So, and all of that now has stopped because, understandably, funding has got tighter. Schools can't afford to invest in that. Colleges can't afford to do it for nothing. So, and it's an expensive thing because there's a lot of supervision and support required for youngsters of that age, and often in more dangerous vocational environments on construction, catering or whatever. But that was something that really was valuable, and that's why for our Optim Plus we have been able to build in the 14 to 16 route, which we're hopeful is going to help us begin to rebuild that provision and that offer. I think the real value will come when parents, young people and schools are actively saying, at 14, this is the right route for this individual and we are going to invest in it. And one of the things that will change from next September is that young people will be able to attend college from the age of 14, and the funding will follow the learner. That's an opportunity. It's also a challenge, because clearly we don't want to disenfranchise the schools who we work very closely with, and we don't just want to, if you like, kind of pinch their students. This is very much about the right provision for the right student. But that's something, as I say, we know actually works. It works really well. And it does lead to much better engagement and much less dropout and failure, both at age 16 but also beyond.